Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. And welcome to a new episode of our exegetical conversations. So, today we will continue with our discussions. The subject we will tackle today is about apologetics and eisegesis. I have decided to divert to this topic because of some request. Before I go back to Luke chapter 15 to continue on the parable of the younger son. But the next episode will be focused on the older son. But today, because of some request, I would like to discuss about apologetics and its cousin, Eisegesis. And I have entitled this podcast, Apologetics and Eisegesis, the Cages of Biblical Interpretation. So buckle up, get your favorite drink, coffee or juice, and stay with me. Human beings have always searched for truth. We observe the world, ask questions about existence, and attempt to understand the forces that shape our lives. Throughout history, sacred texts, philosophical traditions, and scientific inquiry have all played roles in this search. Yet the methods we use to pursue truth can either open our minds or quietly restrict them. Two such methods, Christian apologetics and eisegesis, have played significant roles in religious thought and interpretations. While both have their place in intellectual history, they can also function as limitations on inquiry when used uncritically. In this sense, they may become what we might call cages, cages of interpretation, structures that confine rather than liberate the human search for understanding. Now, in exploring this idea, we are not dismissing faith or tradition. Rather, it is to examine how interpretive frameworks shape what we are able or willing to see and understand. There is this natural human desire to defend belief, especially in religion. Now, apologetics emerges from a natural and understandable impulse, the desire to defend beliefs that one holds to be true and meaningful. The term itself comes from the Greek word apologia, meaning a reasoned defense. Within Christian history, apologetics developed as a response to criticism, philosophical challenges, and competing religious systems. Thinkers such as Augustine of Hippo, Thomas Aquinas, and later writers like C.S. Lewis attempted to demonstrate that Christian teachings were intellectually coherent and morally compelling. In its most constructive form, apologetics encourages careful reasoning. It invites believers to think deeply about their convictions and articulate them clearly. It can also serve as a bridge between faith and philosophy, helping religious ideas engage with broader intellectual traditions. Yet, apologetics carries an inherent tension. The goal of apologetics is not to primarily discover whether a belief is true. Rather, it begins with the assumption that the belief is already true, and it seeks arguments to support that conclusion. This starting point subtly shifts the nature of the inquiry. Instead of asking, what does the evidence reveal? The question becomes, how can the evidence be interpreted to defend what we already believe? The shift does not necessarily invalidate the arguments that follow, but it places boundaries, cages around the exploration. If we follow that, the search for truth becomes a defense of what one already believes. It does not become as a search, it comes as a defense. Apologetics often supplies motivation to defend belief. Its cousin, Eisegesis, frequently provides interpretive mechanism. Eisegesis refers to the practice of reading meaning into the text, allowing one's assumptions, theological commitments, or cultural expectation to shape the interpretation. Instead of drawing meaning out of the text, the interpreter projects meaning onto it. And I hope you do remember our prior conversation about exegesis when I compared it with eisegesis. This approach indeed stands in contrast with exegesis, which attempts to understand a text by examining its historical context, linguistic structure, literary form, and the intentions of its authors. When eisegesis dominates interpretation, a text or an article becomes less a source of discovery and more of a confirmation of existing beliefs. The text appears to support what the reader already holds to be true, not because the text necessarily says so, but because it has been interpreted through a predetermined framework. In this way, interpretation becomes self reinforcing. The reader finds exactly what the reader expected to find. When apologetics and eisegesis operate together, they can create powerful systems of interpretation. Apologetics provides the goal, that is to defend the doctrine. Eisegesis provides the method, and that is to read the doctrine into the text. The result can be a closed interpretive loop in which belief shapes interpretation, and interpretation in turn reinforces belief. It's a cycle. Within such a system, alternative readings are often dismissed, not because they lack evidence, but because they challenge the established framework. Over time, this framework can become deeply embedded in religious institutions and traditions. Generations inherit interpretations that appear authoritative and unquestionable. The interpretive cage becomes so familiar that it is rarely recognized as a cage at all. In religious institutions, they have their own doctrines. Let's say, for example, the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church can be differentiated with the doctrines of the Protestant churches. Each one, when they implement apologetics to defend their own doctrine, they only stays within the parameters of that doctrine. They are not open to entertaining others, or else their doctrine may be challenged. And if the proof on the other doctrine is better, then as we can observe from what is really happening, the results may not be good. And there is no bitter quarrel more bitter than defending doctrines. Yet, intellectual history shows that such structures are not permanent. Moments of reform and discovery often occur when individuals begin to question inherited interpretations and return to the sources themselves. The Protestant Reformation, for example, arose in part from disputes about how scriptures should be interpreted and who had the authority to interpret it. The subsequent Counter Reformation likewise involved intense efforts to define and defend doctrinal boundaries. These historical movements reveal how interpretive frameworks can shape entire religious civilizations, and they have done that. Beyond all this, there is a quest for a better meaning, and I call it the quest, the search for logos. Logos being the underlying human search for meaning in a deeper philosophical intuition that reality itself possesses an underlying order or rational structure. The ancient Greeks referred to this principle as logos, a concept suggesting reason, pattern, or the organizing principle behind the cosmos. For thinkers such as Heraclitus, logos represented the hidden order that governs change and harmony in the universe. Later, the idea of logos took on a profound theological significance in the Gospel of John, where it was used to describe the divine principle through which the universe was created and understood. Although the popular understanding is that the logos became a man, yet the deeper meaning is that the logos is the divine principle through which the universe was created and understood. You have to read John chapter 1 to see that. Now, whether interpreted philosophically or theologically, logos represents the belief that reality is intelligible, that truth can be sought, explored, and gradually understood. Truth might be difficult to really bring out, especially when we are clouded by so many conflicting philosophies. But philosophers believe, and so do I, that truth could be explored and could gradually be understood. But the pursuit of logos requires openness to discovery. If so, then interpretive cages pose a challenge to that pursuit. When interpretation is constrained by the need to defend predetermined conclusions, the search for deeper understanding may be quietly limited. The question becomes not merely what does the text mean, but what are we allowed to see within? To open that cage is something. Recognizing the existence of interpretive cages does not require abandoning tradition or dismissing faith. Rather, it calls for intellectual humility and a willingness to examine the frameworks through which we read and interpret. Sacred texts are products of human history. Note that sacred texts are products of human history. They didn't come down magically from heaven. They emerge within particular cultures, languages, and historical circumstances. To understand them fully requires patience, scholarship, and openness to complexity. It also requires acknowledging that interpretation is an ongoing process. Each generation approaches ancient texts with new questions, new knowledge, and new perspectives. In this sense, interpretation is not a finished task, but a continuing conversation, like what we are doing here. When readers move beyond defensive frameworks and engage text with curiosity rather than certainty, something remarkable can happen. The text, the articles begin to speak again, gives new perspective, new understanding. If we go out of the cage of defending doctrines, it may challenge long held assumptions. It may reveal meanings that previous generations overlooked. It may even deepen the very faith that seemed threatened by questioning. True inquiry, after all, does not weaken truth. It tests it, refines it, and allows it to emerge more clearly. And that is the beauty of the philosophy of deism. It does not hold on to doctrine, it subjects doctrine, looks at it with fresh eyes, with fresh knowledge or fresh understanding. Deism allows the text to speak again. The metaphor of cages is not meant to condemn. No. The intellectual traditions that produce apologetics and interpreted frameworks, apologetics, we're not condemning that. These traditions were often motivated by sincere devotion and genuine attempts to understand the divine. Yet, every intellectual system carries the risk of becoming self protective. When interpretation becomes rigid, when questions are discouraged, and when conclusions are fixed in advance, the search for truth narrows. The bars of the cage may be invisible, especially in doctrines, but they are nonetheless real. Again, in a plainer language, perhaps, apologetics is putting the conclusion ahead of the argumentations. It is a case of placing the wagon before the horse. If you do understand that famous what proverb or what? Yes, there is an old saying: "Don't put the wagon before the horse." It is simple, primordial, rural wisdom. The horse pulls, the wagon follows. Reverse the order, and nothing moves properly. In many theological debates, however, the order is reversed. One camp debating another with a predetermined conclusion. They are not there to seek for truth. They are there to defend their truth. And that's where the trouble lies. Such is religion, my friends. Once you have a doctrine, once it is challenged, forget the saying, all hell breaks loose. Yes, apologetics, eisegesis, two impressive sounding words which frequently appear in the religious discussions. Eisegesis and apologetics. Highfalutin, others might say, because it's beyond the understanding of the common person. They carry academic weight as if they belong only into the world of the scholars. They sound technical, even authoritative, but once stripped of their scholarly polish, they reveal something deeply human and surprisingly simple. And as said somewhere else, it's just common sense that you need to understand, to interpret and understand sacred scriptures. Just open yourself up to the rules that can be applied. Background, language, intention, what is the author saying, what result does he want to bring out, what teaching does he want to bring out, and not your own thinking. Don't read into the text your own thinking, your own presuppose, predetermined conclusion. To really study and bring out the truth is to approach each study from ground zero as if you know nothing. And whatever you can read, that's what you will bring out into the discussion so that the truth of the text can come out. Eisegesis, again, means reading one's own ideas into a text. It happens when a reader approaches scripture not to discover what it says, but to confirm what he already believes. The conclusion is settled before the reading begins. That's wrong. Apologetics refers to the defense of a belief system. It does not set out to ask whether a doctrine is true. Its purpose is to argue that it is true. Again, the conclusion is already in place before the arguments were given out. On the surface, these appear to be different activities, but one concerns interpretation, the other concerns argument. But both often share the same starting point, a fixed conclusion, the wagon before the horse. This is where that proverb becomes illuminating. In genuine inquiry, the order should be look at the evidence, reflect on the evidence, and make conclusion. The evidence is the horse comes first. The conclusion is the wagon. It should come last. The conclusion must be pulled by careful investigation, historical context, linguistic study, and rational reflection. But when eisegesis governs interpretation, the order quietly changes. Wagon first before the horse would be difficult to come out clean with a good interpretation. The reader arrives with the wagon already loaded, creeds secured, doctrines loaded into the wagon, and then it searches for text for confirmation. The horse is not leading, it is being forced to drag what has been already packed. Apologetics frequently mirrors the same reversal. The belief is not on trial, it is under protection. Again, in apologetics, the belief is not on trial, it is being protected. Arguments are gathered not to test it, but to reinforce it. Questions are permitted only insofar as they can be resolved within predetermined boundaries. In both cases, the wagon is placed before the horse. If one comes into a discussion or a debate about the nature of God, for example, if one believes in the Trinity and they open the Bible, they will only look for verses that support that kind of conclusion. If they read a verse that will contradict their predetermined conclusion, They will come out with reasons, arguments why that verse should not be entertained, that but should be dismissed. Now, this observation is not an accusation of dishonesty. It is a structural critique. Human beings, yes, human beings naturally protect their foundations. Religious systems, like all institutions, depend on stability. Stability requires boundaries. Boundaries require defense. As a deist, I have been in a lot of discussions about the Bible, about baptism, about speaking in tongues, and all those things. But I'm not surprised if the one I'm talking with has already established those doctrines in their mind. It would be so hard to argue with them because their conclusion is set before the discussion. Their conclusion has been defined and set before you can even present an argument. And there is no argument, perhaps more crucial and cruel, maybe not cruel, other than discussions on doctrines. When defense begins to shape interpretation, something subtle happens. The text is no longer free to surprise. It must harmonize. Tensions are smooth. Difficult passages are domesticated. Ambiguity becomes the uncomfortable and therefore unacceptable. The result is not exploration, examination, or search, but reinforcement. The deeper issue here is psychological rather than theological. Humans tend to defend identity before they examine truth. Beliefs are rarely abstract propositions. They are woven into community, memory, and personal meaning. To question them can feel like destabilizing the self, destabilizing their belief. And we know that once a doctrine that one holds is challenged, there will be a lot of problem. Self-examination and those things will follow. And especially in a religion where fear is embedded, the fear of hell if you go the other way is embedded. It is really difficult for others to open up, even if you have a solid argument against what they believe. Their wagon is loaded and it is set first in their path. Not out of malice, but that's instinct. And I can say this, friends, because I have been there. And it took me a lot of time to embrace what I now, what philosophy I now believe. And that is deism. And I don't apologize for that. I have found a philosophy that has given me peace and freedom, logical thinking based on observation, reason. I don't have to fill in the gaps of faith as is real in my former philosophy. Deism is beautiful, and I invite you to consider it. It's not another religion, my friends. It's just a new way of approaching the divine, a philosophy. Yet, we know the cost of reversing the order is significant. When the conclusion leads, inquiry becomes constrained. The range of possible outcomes narrows. The horse is no longer choosing the direction, it is dragging a predetermined load. What would it look like to restore the proper order? What would it look like to set the horse ahead of the wagon? Well, we go back to arguments, we go back to lesson. It would mean allowing the evidence to lead, to go ahead, to be first, even if it pulls out somewhere unexpected. If it pulls you to the left or to the right, if that is where the evidence is leading, go for it. It would mean admitting that some doctrines might require revision. It would mean valuing understanding over reinforcement. Such an approach does not eliminate belief. It simply refuses to secure belief before investigation. The old proverb endures because it describes natural order. The horse pulls the wagon. Inquiry leads to conclusion. Evidence shapes belief. When we reverse that order, movement becomes strained. The question then is not whether one engages in eisegesis or apologetics. The more penetrating question is this: are we letting the horse lead? Or have we already fastened the wagon in front and we call it faith? Thank you. Thank you for being with me for this time, and I hope you have learned something. If you have been challenged or blessed in any way, you have reactions, you have comments, please send them to me, and we might be able to talk about them in our next episodes. Help me, please, to make this a real conversation. You have questions, you have reactions, you have thoughts you want to talk about. I'm here to give my thoughts, give an answer, and let the exchange of understanding be friendly, logical, reasonable, and respectful. Again, welcome to our exegetical conversations where we try to find the truth in the things that we believe. Let the horse lead, let the wagon follow. Thank you and God bless. Please subscribe. Please interact, react. So we have some things to talk about. Just like with this subject, it was requested. So I tried to pour my thoughts into the subject. And there's a lot of things for us to talk about in faith. So let's make it really conversational. You, for Filipino friends, you can ask in Tagalog, Ilocano. Pasensya po sa Cebuano, hindi ko po gaanong maintindihan. And we also have some music in YouTube, uploaded in YouTube. We have soundtrack. It's entitled The Voice of Creation. Please listen to those music also. Again, thank you. Goodbye. Until next time. God bless.